The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the dusty archive room. Megan Reynolds adjusted her glasses as she carefully examined the box of photographs that had just arrived from the Lakewood Historical Society. As the lead archivist at the Harmon County Museum, she had processed hundreds of donations over her 15-year career, but something about this particular collection made her pause. The photographs were part of a recently discovered cache, found during the renovation of an old boathouse at Lake Harmon. Most were standard fare, family picnics, boating excursions, and vacation snapshots dating from the early 1900s through the 1950s. Nothing particularly special, but valuable documentation of local life nonetheless. "How's the new collection?" asked David, her assistant, as he placed a cup of coffee beside her. "Just starting to go through it," Megan said, not looking up from her work. "Seems like typical vacation photos, families at the lake, picnics, that sort of thing." She pulled out a particularly well-preserved photograph, its edges only slightly yellowed with age. The back had a date written in faded ink, summer 1905. The image showed three young women sitting on a wooden dock, their long white dresses pooling around them, their legs dangling over the edge above the dark water of what she assumed was Lake Harmon. They looked to be in their late teens, their hair pinned up in the fashion of the era, faces bright with youth and laughter. "This one's in remarkable condition," Megan said, holding it up for David to see. He leaned closer. "Wow, yeah, those girls look like they're having fun." "Hard to imagine that was over 100 years ago." Megan nodded, studying their faces. The girl on the left had a mischievous smile, her head tilted slightly as if sharing a secret. The middle girl was more reserved, her posture straight, hands folded primly in her lap. The third girl was caught mid-laugh, her head thrown back, one hand reaching out to steady herself on the dock. "I wonder who they were," Megan murmured. As she was about to place the photograph in the to-be-catalogued pile, something made her pause. She brought the image closer, squinting at a dark patch in the water beneath the girl's dangling feet. "That's odd," she said, reaching for her magnifying glass. "What is?" David asked, leaning over her shoulder. With the magnifying glass, the dark patch resolved into something that made Megan's stomach tighten. Just beneath the surface of the water, barely visible, was what appeared to be a face, pale, distorted, with dark hollows where the eyes should be, looking up at the unsuspecting girls. "Tell me I'm not seeing things," Megan said, handing David the magnifying glass. He studied the photograph for a long moment. "Probably just a weird reflection or a flaw in the development process," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Megan agreed, wanting to believe it. But something about that face, its expression of silent, watching hunger, sent a chill down her spine despite the warmth of the archive room. She set the photograph aside, trying to dismiss her unease as she continued sorting through the collection. But her eyes kept drifting back to it, to those three laughing girls, and the thing in the water beneath them. That night, Megan dreamed of Lake Harmon. In her dream, she stood on the old wooden dock where the three girls had sat. The water was still and black, reflecting a moonless sky. She knew she shouldn't look down, knew she shouldn't search the water's surface, but found herself doing so anyway. The face was there, larger now, pressing up against the underside of the water as if it were glass, its mouth open in a silent scream, or perhaps a hungry smile. She woke with a start, her heart racing. "Just a dream," she whispered to herself in the darkness of her bedroom. But she knew she wouldn't be able to simply file that photograph away without learning more. The next morning, Megan arrived at the museum earlier than usual. Before beginning her regular tasks, she pulled out the photograph again. In the clear light of morning, the face in the water seemed less distinct, easier to dismiss as a trick of light and shadow or a flaw in the developing process, as David had suggested. Still, she couldn't shake her unease. The Lakewood Historical Society had included basic information about the collection. The photographs had belonged to the Parker family, who had owned a summer home on Lake Harmon from 1890 until 1960, when the property was sold following the death of the last family member. The boathouse where the photos were found had remained untouched for decades until the new owners began renovations. Megan decided to dig deeper. If the girls in the photograph were members of the Parker family, there might be records that could identify them. She spent the morning searching through the museum's database and local historical records. By lunchtime, she had a promising lead. The museum had a collection of diaries donated by the Foster family, another prominent Lakewood family from the same era. Sarah Foster, who would have been around the same age as the girls in the photograph in 1905, had kept detailed accounts of her social activities. If the Parker girls were part of the same social circle, they might be mentioned. Megan located the box containing Sarah Foster's diaries and began carefully paging through the one from 1905. On July 12th, she found what she was looking for. Spent the day at the Parkers' lake house with Lily and Violet. We sat on the dock for hours, talking about the boys from town and planning the end of summer dance. Mrs. Parker took our photograph. I hope it turns out well. Megan sat back, feeling a small thrill of discovery. Sarah Foster was likely one of the girls in the photograph along with Lily and Violet Parker, but her satisfaction was short-lived as she continued reading. Still no sign of poor Ruth. The whole town continues to search, but after 3 days, hope is fading. Her parents are beside themselves. How could she simply vanish while swimming? The lake has been dragged twice with no result. Lily is especially distraught. She was the last to see Ruth alive, having gone swimming with her the morning she disappeared. She keeps saying she should have watched her more carefully, though no one blames her. These accidents happen, though it doesn't make it any less tragic. Megan felt a chill run through her. A girl had drowned in Lake Harmon just days before the photograph was taken. Was it possible? No. She was letting her imagination run wild. The face in the water was just a flaw in the photograph, nothing more. Still, she couldn't help herself from reading on. Over the next several entries, Sarah wrote about the continued search for Ruth's body, the grief of her family, and the pall cast over the summer's festivities. Then, on July 20th, came a disturbing entry. Lily woke the whole house screaming last night. When Mrs. Parker finally calmed her down, Lily claimed she had seen Ruth standing at the foot of her bed, dripping wet, her face bloated and pale. She said Ruth's eyes were open but completely black, and she was pointing at Lily, mouthing words Lily couldn't understand. Mrs. Parker says it was just a nightmare brought on by guilt and grief, but Lily is convinced it was real. She refuses to sleep alone now. Megan closed the diary, her hands trembling slightly. The coincidence was unsettling. A drowned girl whose body was never found, and then a face appearing in the water of a photograph taken just days later. But it had to be a coincidence. Photography in 1905 was still a relatively complicated process. Flaws and strange artifacts in the images were common. She was about to put the diary away when curiosity compelled her to check if there were any further mentions of Ruth or unusual occurrences. Skimming ahead, she found an entry from August 3. The most dreadful thing has happened. Violet is gone. Like Ruth, she simply vanished while swimming. 1 minute she was splashing in the shallows, the next she was nowhere to be seen. The lake has been searched thoroughly, but there is no trace of her. Lily is inconsolable and keeps repeating that Ruth took her. Mrs. Parker has decided they will leave the lake house immediately and return to the city. I fear this summer will forever be marked by these twin tragedies. Megan stared at the page, a sense of dread building in her chest. 2 girls drowned in the same lake within weeks of each other, with no bodies recovered. And now, over a century later, a photograph showing what might be a face in the water beneath 3 unsuspecting girls, one of whom would soon vanish. She needed to know more. The local newspaper archives provided the next pieces of the puzzle. The Lakewood Gazette had covered both disappearances extensively. Ruth Miller, 16, had vanished while swimming on July 9, 1905. Despite extensive searches, her body was never recovered. Violet Parker, 17, disappeared on August 2nd under similar circumstances. Again, no body was found. The articles painted a picture of a community gripped by fear and superstition. Some speculated that there might be dangerous currents in certain parts of the lake, while others whispered about a more sinister explanation. One article mentioned local legends about the lake claiming people, dating back to indigenous stories that the settlers had dismissed as primitive superstition. As the summer of 1905 progressed, panic grew. Parents forbade their children from swimming in the lake. Some families cut their vacations short and returned to the city. By September, the once bustling summer community was largely deserted. Megan found one final relevant article dated October 15, 1905. Third tragedy strikes Lakewood community. The community of Lakewood is reeling from a third tragic loss this year. Sarah Foster, 17, was found drowned in Lake Harmon yesterday morning. Unlike the previous two victims, Miss Foster's body was discovered washed ashore by a local fisherman. The circumstances of her death remain unclear. According to her parents, Sarah had been troubled by nightmares and sleepwalking in recent weeks. It is believed she may have wandered from her home during the night and accidentally fallen into the lake. With this third death, rumors have intensified about a curse on Lake Harmon. Town officials dismiss such talk as harmful superstition during a time of communal grief. Megan sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Sarah Foster, almost certainly one of the girls in the photograph, had also died in the lake just months after her friends. And unlike the others, her body had been found. She returned to the photograph, studying it with newfound unease. If the three girls were Sarah Foster, Lily Parker, and Violet Parker, then two of them had drowned in the lake. And the face in the water. Could it possibly be Ruth Miller, the first to disappear, somehow captured in the photograph as she looked up at her former friends? The thought was absurd, of course. And yet, Megan decided she needed to know what had happened to Lily Parker, the apparent sole survivor of the four friends. Further research revealed that Lily had lived a long life, passing away in 1972 at the age of 84. She had never married and had worked as a schoolteacher in a town nearly 100 miles from Lakewood. There was no indication she had ever returned to Lake Harmon after that fateful summer. As Megan dug deeper, she found one more intriguing document, a transcript of an oral history interview conducted with Lily Parker in 1970, just 2 years before her death, as part of a local history project. Most of the interview focused on her teaching career and her memories of how the region had changed over the decades. But toward the end, the interviewer had asked about her childhood and summers at Lake Harmon. Lily's response was troubling. "I don't speak about Lake Harmon. Those memories are best left undisturbed. I will say only this. There are places in this world that hunger, that are never satisfied. And there are things that wait beneath still waters, patient and ancient. They make promises they never intend to keep. I learned that lesson at great cost." When pressed for clarification, she had firmly refused to elaborate and ended the interview shortly thereafter. Megan printed out her findings and spread them across her desk, trying to make sense of it all. 3 young women from the same social circle had died in the same lake within months of each other. A fourth had lived a long life, but had apparently been haunted by what had happened. And now, over a century later, a photograph had surfaced that potentially showed someone in the water beneath them. As she was lost in thought, David knocked on her office door. "Hey, I was just about to head out. You've been buried in research all day. What did you find?" Megan hesitated, then gestured for him to come in. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, showing him the photograph again. "But the more I learn, the more unsettling this becomes." She summarized her findings as David listened with increasing discomfort. "Okay, that's definitely creepy," he said when she finished. "But you know how these local legends get started. A couple of tragic accidents, and suddenly everyone's talking about lake monsters and curses." "I know," Megan agreed. "And if it were just the local rumors, I'd dismiss it. But this photograph, which was taken with early 20th century equipment," David reminded her. "Those cameras were primitive by our standards. Flaws and artifacts were common." "You're right," Megan said, rubbing her tired eyes. "I'm probably making connections that aren't there." David squeezed her shoulder. "Why don't you call it a day? Everything will seem less ominous after a good night's sleep." Megan nodded, but as David left, she found herself unable to tear herself away from the photograph. There was something about the face in the water, a quality of malevolence, of hungry anticipation, that disturbed her on a primal level. Almost without conscious decision, she found herself reaching for her phone and dialing the number for the Lake Harmon Historical Center. To her surprise, someone answered despite the late hour. "Lake Harmon Historical Center, this is Frank Pearson." "Hi, Mr. Pearson. This is Megan Reynolds from the Harmon County Museum. I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm researching some photographs recently donated to us from the Parker family collection, and I have some questions about Lake Harmon's history." There was a pause on the line. "The Parker collection? I didn't know those photographs had surfaced." Something in his tone made Megan sit up straighter. Yes, they were found during renovations of the old Parker boathouse. Did you know about them? Another pause. Not specifically, no. But I've heard rumors about the Parker family and what happened at their lake house. What exactly do you want to know? Megan explained about the photograph and the face in the water, as well as what she had learned about the 3 drownings in 1905. Frank Pearson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sighed heavily. Ms. Reynolds, there are aspects of Lake Harmon's history that we don't advertise in our tourist brochures. The events of 1905 are part of that history. So you know about Ruth Miller and the Parker girl? And Sarah Foster, yes. It's not the kind of history we highlight, but those of us who study the lake's past are familiar with the story. What you may not know is that they weren't the first or the last. Megan felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Lake Harmon has an unusually high number of drownings for a lake of its size and depth. More troubling is how many bodies are never recovered. Local indigenous peoples called it the hungry water and avoided it entirely. When European settlers arrived, they dismissed these warnings as superstition. But you don't think it was just superstition, Megan said, making it a statement rather than a question. I think there are things about this world we don't understand, Frank said carefully. And I think some places have an energy, a presence, whatever you want to call it, that is fundamentally hostile to human life. And you believe Lake Harmon is such a place? I believe the statistical anomalies speak for themselves. Since records began in 1855, Lake Harmon has claimed over 60 lives. In nearly half those cases, bodies were never recovered, despite modern diving equipment and search techniques. Megan thought about the face in the photograph, its expression of hunger. Have there been any other unusual photographs of the lake? Frank hesitated. There have been incidents. Unexplained images, yes. In fact, we have a small collection of what we call anomalous documentation related to the lake. It's not available to the general public, but as a fellow historian, I'd be willing to share it with you. I'd appreciate that, Megan said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread in her stomach. I should warn you, Ms. Reynolds. Sometimes looking too deeply into these matters can have consequences. What kind of consequences? Let's just say that those who take a special interest in the lake's history sometimes find that the lake takes an interest in them as well. After hanging up, Megan sat in her office for a long time staring at the photograph. The 3 girls smiled back at her, blissfully unaware of what lurked beneath them, unaware that 2 of them would soon join it in the dark waters. Eventually, she forced herself to pack up her research and head home. As she drove, she found herself taking a route that passed by Lake Harmon, though it wasn't her usual way home. The lake was beautiful in the evening light, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the deepening blue of the sky. Hard to imagine it as a place of death and disappearance. On impulse, she pulled into the small parking area at the public access point. A few fishing boats were still out on the water, and a couple walked along the shoreline path, but otherwise the lake was quiet. Megan got out of her car and walked to the edge of the water, looking out over its placid surface. Had Lily Parker been right? Was there something here that hungered? Something ancient and patient that waited beneath the still waters? As the thought crossed her mind, a breeze rippled across the lake, distorting her reflection. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought she saw another face superimposed over her own in the water, pale with dark, hollow eyes. She stumbled back from the shore, her heart racing. Just a trick of the light, she told herself. Just her imagination, overstimulated by a day spent dwelling on old tragedies. That night, Megan dreamed of Lake Harmon again. In the dream, she stood on the old dock where the photograph had been taken. The 3 girls sat with their backs to her, their white dresses gleaming in moonlight, legs dangling over the dark water. Be careful, Megan tried to warn them. There's something in the water. Slowly, the girl in the middle turned her head. It was Sarah Foster, but her face was bloated and pale, her eyes black voids. Water dripped from her hair and clothes. We know, Sarah said, her voice bubbling as if speaking through water. It's been waiting for you. The other 2 girls turned as well, Violet and Lily, both with the same drowned appearance. Below them, the water began to churn, and a pale hand reached up to grasp at their ankles. Megan tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the dock. The girls smiled at her with blue-lipped mouths as the thing in the water pulled itself up beside them. It had Ruth Miller's face, but distorted, elongated, more fish than human now. It looked at Megan with hungry black eyes. "Your turn," it said in a voice like water rushing over stones. Megan woke, gasping. Sheets tangled around her legs. Outside, rain pattered against her window, and distant thunder rolled across the sky. She got up and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. As she looked up at her reflection, she had the disturbing sense that it wasn't quite right, as if the face in the mirror was slightly out of sync with her movements. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She was letting the photograph and its story get to her. Today she would meet with Frank Pearson at the Lake Harmon Historical Center, review whatever anomalous documentation he had, and then put this whole unsettling business behind her. The Lake Harmon Historical Center was housed in a converted Victorian mansion overlooking the north shore of the lake. Despite the continued rain, Megan could see the water from the parking lot, gray and choppy under the storm clouds. Frank Pearson met her at the entrance. He was older than she had expected, well into his 70s, with a lined face and alert blue eyes. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her, extending a hand. "I've prepared the materials you might be interested in. Please, follow me." He led her to a small research room at the back of the building. A table had been set up with several boxes of materials, photographs, newspapers, journals, and what appeared to be oral history transcripts. "This is our collection of what I mentioned, anomalous documentation related to the lake," Frank explained. "Some of it is straightforward historical record, but other items, well, they defy easy explanation." "Thank you for sharing this with me," Megan said, already scanning the materials eagerly. Frank hesitated at the door. "I should warn you again, Ms. Reynolds, these waters, figuratively and literally, they're dangerous to navigate. The deeper you go—" "I understand," Megan assured him, though she wasn't sure she did, not really. "I'll leave you to it then. I'll be in my office if you have questions." Alone with the materials, Megan began a methodical examination. She started with the historical records, newspaper articles, death certificates, police reports, documenting the long history of drownings and disappearances in Lake Harmon. The pattern was unmistakable and disturbing. Not only were there far more deaths than would be expected for a lake of its size, but the circumstances often included bizarre elements: experienced swimmers drowning in calm conditions, people disappearing within sight of shore, bodies that were recovered showing signs of unexplained physical trauma or accelerated decomposition. More unsettling were the personal accounts, diaries, letters, and oral histories from people who had encountered something strange in or around the lake. A journal from 1878 described a fisherman seeing hands reaching up from the depths to tangle in his nets. A letter from 1923 recounted how a young woman had been pulled underwater by something with a human face but too many limbs. A transcript from 1967 contained the testimony of a man who claimed that while night fishing, he had seen a procession of pale figures walking on the lake bottom, looking up at the surface world with longing. Then there were the photographs. Most were similar to the one Megan had found. Ordinary scenes with subtle, easily missed anomalies. A family picnic where one figure's reflection in the lake didn't match their appearance above water. A boating party where something that looked like a human hand gripped the side of the boat, though no one was in the water. A swimming race where a pale face seemed to be looking up at the competitors from below. One photograph in particular seized Megan's attention. Dated 1906, it showed Lily Parker sitting alone on the shore, staring out at the water. Behind her, barely visible in the lake, were three indistinct figures that appeared to be watching her from just beneath the surface. Accompanying the photograph was a note in Lily's handwriting. "They're always there now, waiting, watching. They think I don't see them, but I do. Ruth, Violet, Sarah. They want me to join them, but I won't. I promised myself I would never go near that water again." Megan sat back, trying to process what she was seeing. If these materials were to be believed, Lake Harmon wasn't just the site of tragic accidents, it was something far more sinister. A place where the dead didn't rest, where something in the water hungered for human life. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Ghost stories and local superstitions, nothing more. And yet, the evidence was compelling in its consistency and volume. Generations of people, across different time periods, reporting similar experiences. The statistical anomaly of the drownings. The photographs with their subtle but disturbing details. She was so absorbed in her research that she didn't notice the time passing until Frank knocked on the door. "Ms. Reynolds, it's nearly closing time. How are you progressing?" Megan looked up, startled to see that the light outside the windows had dimmed considerably. "I'm sorry, I lost track of time. This collection is remarkable." Frank nodded. "And disturbing, I imagine." "Yes," Megan admitted. "Especially in light of the photograph I found. It seems to be part of a pattern." "That's what I was afraid of," Frank said quietly. "May I see this photograph?" Megan had brought a high-resolution copy, which she handed to him. Frank studied it for a long moment, his expression grave. "The face in the water," he said finally. "It has a certain quality I've seen before." He opened a drawer in the research room's desk and pulled out a magnifying glass, examining the photograph more closely. "Yes, there's a resemblance to other images in our collection. The eyes especially, those hollow dark spots, and the expression of hunger," Megan said softly. Frank looked up sharply. "Yes, exactly. You've sensed it too, then." "What do you think it means?" Megan asked. "All of this, the drownings, the photographs, the stories." Frank sighed heavily. "I've spent decades studying the history of this lake, Ms. Reynolds. The official version and the unofficial one. I've interviewed dozens of people who've had strange experiences here. I've collected every piece of documentation I could find. And I've come to a conclusion that I realize sounds absurd to modern ears." "Try me," Megan said. "I believe there is something in Lake Harmon that doesn't belong in our world. Something old and hungry that has found a thin place, a way through. It takes people, not randomly, but according to some pattern or purpose I haven't been able to discern. And sometimes it shows itself in photographs, in glimpses, in the stories people tell themselves to make sense of what they've experienced." Megan thought of the face in the water, looking up at the three girls with that terrible hunger. If that's true, then why isn't this place infamous? Why isn't it avoided? It was for a long time. The indigenous peoples never settled near its shores. Early European settlers reported strange occurrences and avoided swimming in it. But as time passed, as modern rationality took hold, the stories became just that. Stories. Few people died. The lake seemed peaceful enough, and eventually a tourist industry developed. But the drownings continued, Megan pointed out. Yes, but spread out over decades, easy to dismiss as tragic accidents. And the bodies that were never recovered, well, lakes can be mysterious that way. Megan thought about the photograph again, about those three girls sitting on the dock, unaware of what lurked beneath them. Two would join it within months. The third would live a long life, haunted by what she had seen. "The Parker photograph," she said slowly. "If what you're saying is true, then it captured the moment when this entity had already claimed Ruth Miller and was watching its next victims." "That would be my interpretation, yes," Frank agreed grimly. "And now the photograph has resurfaced, a century later." Frank met her eyes. Which raises the question, why now? And why was it found at all after being hidden for so long? A chill ran down Megan's spine. "You think it's significant that the photograph has reappeared?" "In my experience, Ms. Reynolds, when it comes to Lake Harmon, there are very few coincidences." The drive home from the historical center was tense. The rain had intensified, drumming on the roof of Megan's car and reducing visibility to a few yards. She had to drive slowly, eyes straining to follow the winding lakeside road. Several times she thought she saw movement in the water to her right, pale shapes just beneath the surface keeping pace with her car. But when she looked directly, there was nothing but rain-pocked waves. She tried to focus on the road, to dismiss the creeping sense of dread that had settled over her. Frank Pearson's theories were compelling but ultimately unprovable. The drownings could be explained by dangerous currents or other natural features of the lake. The photographs could be the result of flaws in early cameras or simple pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces and patterns where none existed. And yet, as she rounded a bend in the road, her headlights swept across a figure standing at the lake's edge. Megan slammed on her brakes, the car skidding slightly on the wet pavement. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could make out a woman in a long pale dress, her back to the road as she stared out over the water. Megan rolled down her window. "Hello? Are you all right?" The woman didn't respond or turn around. Concerned, Megan pulled to the side of the road and got out, the rain immediately soaking through her light jacket. "Miss, it's not safe to be out in this storm." As Megan approached, the woman slowly turned. For a heart-stopping moment, Megan thought she was looking at one of the girls from the photograph. The pale dress, the hairstyle, the slender figure were all reminiscent of that 1905 image. But as the woman's face came into view, Megan saw that it was much older, lined with age, though the eyes were sharp and alert. "You've been looking into the lake's history," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" Megan asked, suddenly wary. "Someone who knows what you're looking for," the woman replied. "And what's looking for you?" A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, reflecting off the lake's choppy surface. In that brief, stark moment of brightness, Megan thought she saw figures in the water behind the woman, pale forms just beneath the surface, their faces turned upward. When darkness returned, the woman was several steps closer, though Megan hadn't seen her move. "The photograph you found," the woman said. "You should have left it buried." Megan took an involuntary step back. "How do you know about that?" "I know many things about Lake Harmon and what dwells within it." The woman's voice was oddly calm despite the raging storm. "I know that it hungers. I know that it waits. I know that it remembers." Another lightning flash, another glimpse of those pale forms in the water, closer now to the shore. "Who are you?" Megan repeated, fighting to keep her voice steady. The woman smiled, a sad expression that didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Alice Parker. Lily was my grandmother." Megan stared at her in shock. "Lily Parker? From the photograph?" Alice nodded. She never spoke of that summer to anyone in the family. All she would say was that the lake had taken her sister and her friends, and that she had escaped only because they had sacrificed themselves for her. "Sacrificed themselves?" Megan echoed. That's what she believed. That Ruth, Violet, and Sarah had made some kind of deal with whatever lives in the lake, their lives for hers. But the price was that she would live with the knowledge of what waited in the water and with the guilt of surviving. Another flash of lightning. The figures in the water were at the very edge now, where water met land. "Why are you telling me this?" Megan asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. "Because you found the photograph," Alice said simply. "And now it has found you." "What does that mean?" "It means the lake is aware of you. It means you've drawn its attention." Alice's gaze shifted to something over Megan's shoulder. "And it means you're in danger." Megan turned slowly, half expecting to see some dripping apparition behind her. But there was only the empty road and her parked car. When she turned back, Alice was walking toward the lake. "Wait," Megan called. "What should I do?" Alice paused at the water's edge. "Stay away from the lake. Get rid of the photograph. Burn it if you can, and pray that it loses interest in you." Before Megan could respond, Alice stepped into the water. Megan cried out in alarm, but the old woman continued walking calmly forward, the lake rising to her knees, her waist, her shoulders. Megan ran toward the shore, but by the time she reached it, Alice had disappeared beneath the surface. Megan scanned the churning water desperately, but there was no sign of the old woman. "Alice!" she shouted, her voice lost in the storm. For a moment, she thought she saw a hand reach up from the water, not in a gesture of distress, but of beckoning. Then it was gone, and Megan was alone on the shore, rain pouring down around her. Shaken, she retreated to her car and sat for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Had Alice Parker drowned herself? Should Megan call for help? But what would she say? That an elderly woman had walked into the lake and vanished after warning her about some ancient evil in the water? Eventually, she started the car and continued home, her mind racing. If Alice had been telling the truth, if Lily Parker had believed her friends made some sort of sacrifice to save her, what did that mean for the photograph Megan had found? Was it merely documentation of a tragedy, or something more sinister, a record of the moment when whatever dwelled in the lake had marked its next victims? And now, according to Alice, it had marked Megan as well. Back at her apartment, Megan tried to dismiss these thoughts as she toweled her hair dry and changed into warm clothes. The encounter with Alice Parker, if that had even been her real name, was disturbing, but not necessarily supernatural. The woman could have been mentally ill or playing an elaborate prank. And if she had walked into the lake, well, Megan would check the local news in the morning for reports of a drowning. As for the photograph and the disturbing history of Lake Harmon, there were rational explanations. Clusters of accidents happened. Cameras had flaws. People loved to create legends and myths around natural phenomena they didn't understand. Megan made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table, trying to calm her racing thoughts. On impulse, she took out her phone and searched for Alice Parker Lakewood. The search returned several results, including an obituary from 3 years earlier. Alice Parker, 87, passed away peacefully at her home in Lakewood on March 12, 2022. Born in 1935 to Thomas and June Parker, Alice was the granddaughter of Lily Parker, one of Lakewood's earliest residents. Alice was a respected local historian who dedicated much of her life to preserving the stories and artifacts of the Lakewood region. Megan stared at the screen, her tea growing cold beside her. If Alice Parker had died 3 years ago, then who was the woman by the lake? Sleep was elusive that night. Megan tossed and turned, her dreams filled with dark water and pale faces looking up from the depths. In one particularly vivid dream, she was swimming in Lake Harmon, the water cool and inviting around her. Then something grabbed her ankle, a hand, cold and strong, and began pulling her down. She kicked and struggled, but more hands joined the first, dragging her deeper. As she sank, she saw the faces of the girls from the photograph, Ruth, Violet, and Sarah, watching her with black, empty eyes. Behind them, something larger moved in the darkness, something with too many limbs, and a hunger that Megan could feel like a physical force. She woke gasping for air, tangled in her sheets as if she'd been fighting them. The bedside clock showed 3:17 a.m. Rain still pattered against her window, a gentle sound at odds with her racing heart. As she lay there, trying to calm her breathing, Megan became aware of a sound from the bathroom. A slow, steady dripping. Reluctantly, she got up to investigate. The bathroom was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside her window. The dripping sound was coming from the sink. She flicked on the light and saw that the faucet was leaking, drops of water hitting the porcelain with rhythmic precision. Megan tightened the handle, and the dripping stopped. As she turned to leave, something in the mirror caught her eye, a smudge or shadow that hadn't been there before. She leaned closer, examining the glass. It wasn't a smudge. It was a handprint, as if someone with a wet hand had pressed it against the mirror from the other side. Water droplets still ran down from it, tracing rivulets across the glass. Megan backed away, her heart pounding. The handprint hadn't been there when she'd gotten ready for bed. She was certain of it, which meant someone, or something, had been in her bathroom while she slept. She grabbed her phone from the bedside table, ready to call the police, when she noticed that the screen was wet. When she picked it up, water dripped from it, though nothing near it was damp. The screen flickered, displaying a single image before going dark, the photograph of the 3 girls at the lake, but altered somehow. The girls' faces blurred and distorted, the face in the water larger and more distinct, looking not at the girls now, but directly at the viewer. Megan dropped the phone as if it had burned her. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a rational explanation. She was tired, stressed, her mind playing tricks after a day spent immersed in disturbing historical accounts. She spent the rest of the night sitting in her living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and settling sound from her apartment. By morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight streamed through her windows, making the events of the night seem distant and dreamlike. Her phone was working normally, with no sign of water damage, and when she checked the bathroom mirror, the handprint was gone. Had she imagined it all? Was she experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination? Despite her exhaustion, Megan went to work. The museum offered normalcy, routine, a refuge from the unsettling thoughts that had plagued her through the night. But as she sat at her desk, she found herself returning to the photograph of the 3 girls and the face in the water. "You look terrible," David said, poking his head into her office. "Rough night?" "You could say that," Megan replied, not looking up from the photograph. David came in and sat across from her. You're still obsessing over that old picture, huh? I went to the Lake Harmon Historical Center yesterday, Megan said. They have an entire collection of strange occurrences related to the lake, drownings, disappearances, unusual photographs. David frowned. And you think our photograph is connected to all that? I know how it sounds, Megan said defensively. But the evidence is compelling. There's a pattern that spans over a century. Or there's a perfectly rational explanation that doesn't involve lake monsters or ghosts, David countered. Maybe the lake has dangerous currents. Maybe the old cameras were prone to certain types of flaws. Maybe, Megan conceded. But last night, she stopped, suddenly reluctant to share her experience. How could she explain the woman who claimed to be Alice Parker, who walked into the lake and vanished? Or the wet handprint on her mirror? The water-damaged phone that wasn't damaged in the morning? It all sounded like the delusions of someone losing touch with reality. Last night what? David prompted. Nothing, Megan said, shaking her head. Just some weird dreams. David looked concerned. Megan, I think this research is getting to you. Maybe you should take a step back, get some perspective. You're probably right, she agreed, though she had no intention of abandoning her investigation. I could use a break. But even as she said it, she knew she wouldn't be able to let go of the mystery. Not with the face in the water seemingly watching her from the photograph. Not with the lingering unease from her encounter with the woman claiming to be Alice Parker. Not with the strange occurrences in her apartment the night before. After David left, Megan called Frank Pearson at the Historical Center. Mr. Pearson, it's Megan Reynolds. I need to ask you something. Did Lily Parker have a granddaughter named Alice? Yes, she did, Frank confirmed. Alice was quite involved with the Historical Center for many years. She passed away a few years ago. I was afraid you'd say that, Megan murmured. Why do you ask? Megan hesitated, then decided to trust him with the truth. Because I met someone claiming to be Alice Parker last night by the lake. She warned me about the photograph, said it had drawn the lake's attention to me. Then she walked into the water and disappeared. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice grave. Ms. Reynolds, I believe you're in danger. From what exactly? Megan asked, though she was beginning to fear she knew the answer. From whatever lives in Lake Harmon. If it's showing itself to you, contacting you through visions or apparitions, that means it's fixated on you. And based on the historical pattern, that's not good. What should I do? Get rid of the photograph, first of all. Don't keep it in your home or office. Then stay away from the lake, as far away as possible. And if that doesn't work, Frank hesitated. There are methods that some have tried. Protective rituals, countermeasures. The indigenous peoples had ways of warding off the lake's influence. I have some documentation that might help. But Ms. Reynolds, you need to understand. Once the lake has marked someone, it rarely gives up. After hanging up, Megan sat staring at the photograph. The face in the water seemed clearer now, its expression more defined, a hungry anticipation, as if it knew something she didn't. On impulse, she took the photograph to the museum's digitization lab. If she was going to get rid of it, she wanted a high-resolution scan first. As the lab technician prepared the scanner, Megan studied the photograph one more time. That's odd, the technician said as the scanned image appeared on his monitor. What is? Megan asked, moving to look over his shoulder. The scan doesn't match the physical photograph. He pointed to the screen. See here, in the water? There's nothing. But in the original, Megan looked back at the physical photograph. The face in the water was still there, still watching. But in the digital scan, the water beneath the girl's feet was empty. Just dark lake water with no sign of any face or figure. Let me try again, the technician said, frowning. The second scan produced the same result. A perfect reproduction of the photograph except for the absence of the face in the water. Must be something about the original that the scanner can't pick up, the technician mused. Some quality of the old photographic paper or chemical process, maybe. Or something that didn't want to be captured digitally, Megan thought, but didn't say. She thanked the technician and took both the original photograph and the digital copy back to her office. If the face couldn't be scanned, what did that mean? Was it somehow only visible to the naked eye? Or was it, as she was beginning to fear, something that existed outside the normal physical properties of the photograph itself? Something that had attached itself to the image? Megan decided to follow Frank's advice and get rid of the original photograph. She would leave it in the museum's climate-controlled storage for now, properly cataloged and preserved as part of the Parker collection, but away from her personal space. As she was preparing to go home that evening, her phone rang. It was David. "Megan, you need to come to the digitization lab right away." "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. "Just get down here. You need to see this." In the lab, David was staring at a computer monitor, his face pale. On the screen was the scan of the photograph, but it had changed. The three girls were still there, still sitting on the dock, but now the water beneath them was churning, disturbed, and not one but three faces looked up from the depths. One was the original face that Megan had identified as likely belonging to Ruth Miller. The other two were new but hauntingly familiar, Sarah Foster and Violet Parker, their features distorted as if seen through moving water, their eyes dark holes, their mouths open in what might have been screams or hungry smiles. "I was reviewing the scan because something seemed off about it," David explained, his voice shaking slightly. "At first, it looked normal, just the three girls, no face in the water like you'd claimed. I thought maybe you'd been seeing things. But then, as I was looking at it, it changed, right before my eyes, like someone was editing it in real time, but no one was touching the computer." Megan stared at the screen, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "And now there are three faces. Three faces that weren't there in the original scan," David confirmed. "Megan, what the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, the image on the screen changed again. The three girls on the dock turned their heads, no longer looking at the camera, but directly at the viewers. Their expressions had changed from youthful joy to something empty and hungry. Below them, the water churned more violently, and a fourth face began to emerge from the depths. It was Megan's face, her eyes black and hollow, her mouth open in a silent scream. David swore and pushed back from the computer. That's you." Megan couldn't speak, couldn't tear her eyes away from the horrifying image on the screen. As they watched, the digital version of her face in the water seemed to look directly at them, its expression morphing into a terrible smile. Then the computer screen went black, the image vanishing as if it had never been there. "Okay," David said, his voice unsteady. "I take back every skeptical thing I said." "What the hell is happening?" Megan told him everything. Her research at the historical center, her encounter with the woman claiming to be Alice Parker, the strange occurrences in her apartment the night before. As she spoke, the weight of it all crashed down on her. Whatever dwelled in Lake Harmon had fixed its attention on her, and if the historical pattern held true, that meant she was in grave danger. "You need to get out of town," David said when she finished. "Go stay with your sister in Chicago for a while. Get as far from that lake as possible." "And if it follows me?" Megan asked quietly. "If distance doesn't matter, then we figure something else out. But right now, I think physical distance is your best bet." Megan nodded. David was right. Whatever was happening, staying in Lakewood, so close to Lake Harmon, couldn't be safe. She went back to her office to gather her things, planning to go straight home, pack a bag, and start driving to Chicago that night. But as she was putting files away, she noticed something on her desk that hadn't been there before. A small leather-bound book, its cover dark with age. Cautiously, she opened it. Inside, in faded handwriting, was the name Lily Parker, and a date, 1906. It was a diary beginning several months after the events of that fatal summer. The first entry read, "I dreamed of them again last night. Ruth, Violet, Sarah. They were standing at the foot of my bed, water dripping from their clothes, their eyes black and empty. They asked why I didn't join them, why I broke our promise. I tried to tell them I never made any promise, but they wouldn't listen. We gave ourselves for you," Sarah said. "Now it wants you too." I woke screaming, my bedsheet soaked as if I'd been in the water myself. Megan flipped through the diary, her sense of dread growing. Entry after entry described Lily's nightmares, her sense of being watched, strange occurrences involving water, faucets turning on by themselves, puddles forming in dry rooms, her reflection in mirrors and windows changing to show a drowned version of herself. Then came an entry that made Megan's blood run cold. "Mrs. Miller came to see me today. She was distraught, barely coherent. She said Ruth had visited her in the night. Not a dream, she insisted, but Ruth herself, standing dripping at her bedside. Ruth told her mother that she was still in the lake, that it wouldn't let her leave, and that she was so cold, so hungry. Before Mrs. Miller could embrace her, Ruth vanished, leaving only a puddle of lake water on the floor. I didn't tell Mrs. Miller about my own visitations, about how Ruth and the others come to me too. I couldn't bear to cause her more pain, but I fear the lake isn't finished with any of us who were there that day. I fear it never will be. Megan continued reading, her hands trembling. The diary documented Lily's increasing paranoia and fear over the following months. She refused to go near the lake, moved away from Lakewood entirely, but still the dreams came, still the strange occurrences followed her. The final entry was dated nearly a year after the first. I know now what must be done. The old woman from the indigenous village explained it to me. The lake is hungry, has always been hungry, will always be hungry. It marks those it wants and doesn't rest until it has them. But there are ways to appease it, to redirect its hunger. I've taken what I need from my father's hunting supplies. Tonight, I will go to the lake one last time. Not to give myself to it, I won't give it that satisfaction, but to give it something else, something to turn its attention away from me. May God forgive me for what I'm about to do. The diary ended there. Megan sat back, her mind racing. What had Lily done that night? Whatever it was, it had apparently worked. She had lived a long life, dying at 84, far from Lake Harmon. But now, a century later, something had awakened. The discovery of the photograph, hidden for decades in the boathouse, had somehow reactivated whatever connection existed between the lake, the girls in the photograph, and now, Megan herself. She needed to know what Lily had done to redirect the lake's attention. The diary mentioned an old woman from the indigenous village. Was there any record of what she had told Lily? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Megan noticed something tucked into the back cover of the diary, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She carefully extracted it and unfolded it. It was covered in handwritten notes, diagrams, and what appeared to be instructions in a mixture of English and another language she didn't recognize. At the top was written, "To turn aside the hunger of the waters, one must give it a suitable substitute. Not any life will do. It must be freely given, with knowledge and intent." The rest of the document detailed a ritual, ingredients to gather, words to speak, actions to perform at the lake's edge under a moonless sky. It was disturbing in its specificity and in the repeated emphasis on the need for a willing sacrifice. Had Lily sacrificed someone else to save herself? The thought was horrifying, but it would explain her cryptic final diary entry and her subsequent escape from the lake's influence. Megan was so absorbed in the document that she didn't notice the puddle forming on her desk until it began to soak into the diary's pages. She jerked back in alarm. Water was seeping up through the wood of her desk, dark and smelling of algae and decay, lake water. As she watched in horror, the puddle expanded, dripping onto the floor, forming a widening circle around her chair. From somewhere nearby came the sound of lapping waves, though she was in a second-floor office with no water source. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the office into near darkness, the only illumination coming from the emergency exit sign in the hallway, casting everything in a sickly red glow. In that dim light, Megan saw movement in the puddle on her desk, a rippling, as if something was rising to the surface. Slowly, a face began to form in the water, not Ruth or Violet or Sarah, but the woman who had claimed to be Alice Parker, her eyes now black and hollow, her skin pale and bloated. "They're coming for you," the face in the water said, its voice bubbling and wet. "They've waited so long. They're so hungry." "Who's coming?" Megan asked, her voice barely a whisper. "All of them. Everyone the lake has taken. Everyone it will take." The face smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "You found the diary. You know what must be done." "I won't sacrifice someone else," Megan said firmly, despite her terror. "Then you will join us," the face replied simply. "Tonight, when the moon is hidden." The face began to sink back into the puddle. As it disappeared, the water receded as well, drawing back into the wood of the desk until no trace remained, not even dampness. The lights flickered back on, revealing Megan's office exactly as it had been, with no sign of the supernatural intrusion. Only the diary and the ritual instructions on her desk confirmed that what she had experienced had been real. Megan grabbed the diary and the ritual instructions, shoved them into her bag, and fled the office. In the hallway, she nearly collided with David, who was coming to check on her. "Whoa, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, steadying her. "We need to leave," Megan said urgently. "Now. I'll explain in the car." As they drove away from the museum, Megan told David about the diary, the ritual instructions, and her vision of Alice's face in the water on her desk. "So Lily Parker found a way to redirect this thing's attention," David summarized, "by sacrificing someone else." "That's what it sounds like," Megan agreed grimly. "But I can't do that. I won't." "Of course not," David said. "But maybe there's another way to interpret the ritual. Maybe the willing sacrifice doesn't have to be a person." Megan considered this. The instructions were specific about it needing to be freely given with knowledge and intent. And that suggests consciousness, awareness. Or maybe it's more symbolic, David suggested. A sacrifice of something meaningful to you. Something that represents a part of yourself. "Maybe," Megan said, though she wasn't convinced. The face in the water had been clear about what was coming for her that night, when the moon was hidden. Which reminded her, what's the moon phase tonight? David pulled out his phone and checked. New moon. No moonlight at all. Of course it was. The timing couldn't be coincidental. "I still think you should get out of town," David said. "At least for tonight. We can figure out a more permanent solution once you're safely away from the lake." Megan nodded, though a part of her wondered if distance would make any difference. The lake had found ways to reach her already, through the photograph, through visions, through water that appeared where it shouldn't be. Would being in Chicago really protect her? But she had to try. She directed David to her apartment so she could pack a bag. As they pulled into her parking lot, Megan noticed something odd. A wet trail leading from the lake, which was visible in the distance, up to her building and inside. Water footprints, as if someone soaking wet had walked from the lake directly to her door. "I don't like this," David said, eyeing the wet trail. "Me neither," Megan agreed, "but I need my things if I'm going to leave town." They cautiously followed the wet footprints into the building and up to Megan's apartment. The trail led directly to her door, which was closed, but Megan realized with a sinking feeling, not locked. She was certain she had locked it that morning. "Maybe we should call the police," David suggested. "And tell them what? That we're being stalked by a supernatural entity from a lake?" Megan shook her head. "Let's just get my things and go." She pushed open the door, bracing herself for whatever might be waiting inside. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn against the evening light. The wet footprints continued across her living room floor, leading to the bathroom. The door was closed, but light spilled out from beneath it, along with the sound of water running, a bath being filled. "Hello?" Megan called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is someone there?" No response, just the continued sound of running water. "We should leave," David whispered. "Right now." But Megan found herself moving toward the bathroom door, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't explain. She had to see what was behind it, had to confront whatever waited for her. "Megan, don't," David warned, reaching for her arm. But she was already turning the handle, pushing the door open, stepping into the steam-filled bathroom. The tub was full to the brim with dark water that smelled of lake algae and decay. Floating on the surface were 3 white flowers, water lilies, their petals ghostly in the dim light. And rising from the water, 3 pale faces watched her with black, hollow eyes. Ruth, Violet, and Sarah, their features distorted but recognizable from the photograph. Their wet hair clung to their bloated faces, and their mouths opened in unison to speak in a terrible chorus of bubbling voices. "Join us, Megan. The water is warm. The water is waiting. The water is hungry." David appeared behind her, let out a strangled cry of shock at the sight, and pulled her back. "We're leaving now." As they stumbled back from the bathroom, the water from the tub began to overflow, pouring out onto the floor, racing toward them as if alive and purposeful. Within the flood, Megan thought she could see more faces forming, more hands reaching, not just the 3 girls from the photograph, but dozens of others, all with the same hollow eyes and hungry expressions. All the people Lake Harmon had claimed over the decades. They fled the apartment, the water pursuing them down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the parking lot. Only when they reached David's car did it stop, receding back toward the building as if it had reached the limit of its reach. For now. Drive. Megan gasped as they slammed the car door shut. Just drive. David didn't need to be told twice. He gunned the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, heading away from both Megan's apartment and the direction of Lake Harmon. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "That was the lake," Megan said quietly. "Coming for me." They drove in tense silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and Lakewood. But as the road curved around a hill, they found themselves unexpectedly facing water again. Another arm of Lake Harmon, reaching like a finger into the landscape. "This isn't right," David muttered, checking his GPS. "There shouldn't be lake here." But there it was, dark water reflecting the twilight sky, stretching across what should have been dry land. And as they watched, something began to rise from its center. A figure, walking on the water's surface toward the shore, toward the road, toward them. David swore and made a sharp U-turn, tires squealing on the pavement. "New plan. We avoid the lake at all costs, even if it means driving an extra 100 miles. But as they continued, they encountered water again and again, in places where no water should be, blocking roads, forcing them to turn back and find new routes. It was as if the lake was expanding, reaching out, cutting off their escape routes one by one. "It's hurting us," Megan realized. "Driving us back toward Lakewood. Well, we're not going to let it," David said grimly, taking yet another detour. But after nearly 2 hours of fruitless attempts to leave the area, always finding their path blocked by water where none should be, they had to acknowledge the truth. They were trapped. The lake wasn't letting them go. "What do we do now?" David asked, his earlier bravado replaced by grim resignation. Megan looked out at the darkness, at the distant lights of Lakewood reflected in the vast expanse of Lake Harmon. "We do what Lily did," she said quietly. "We find a way to redirect its attention. Without sacrificing anyone," David added firmly. "Without sacrificing anyone," Megan agreed. They drove to the only place Megan could think of that might have answers, the Lake Harmon Historical Center. Despite the late hour, light still burned in the windows, as if the building was expecting them. Frank Pearson met them at the door, his face grave. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" "The lake is everywhere," Megan confirmed. "It's cutting off all escape routes. And the entities, the drowned ones, they're after me. They were in my apartment, in my bathtub." Frank nodded as if this was exactly what he had expected to hear. "Come inside. We don't have much time." He led them to the research room where Megan had examined the anomalous documentation the day before. The table was now covered with new materials, old books, scrolls of yellowed paper, artifacts that looked ancient and disturbing. "I've been researching all day," Frank explained. "Ever since you told me about your encounter with what appeared to be Alice Parker. The patterns are accelerating. The lake is more active than it's been in decades. I found Lily Parker's diary," Megan said, pulling it from her bag, "and instructions for some kind of ritual." Frank took the diary with reverent care. "This is remarkable. We never knew what became of Lily's personal papers. The diary suggests she performed a ritual to redirect the lake's attention away from herself," Megan explained. "A ritual that involved a willing sacrifice." "Yes," Frank said grimly. "That aligns with what I've found in other sources. The indigenous peoples who lived here before European settlement had a practice. When the lake became too hungry, too aggressive in its taking, they would offer it a chosen one, someone who would go willingly into the waters." "Human sacrifice?" David asked, horrified. "Not exactly," Frank clarified. "The chosen one wasn't killed before being given to the lake. They walked in alive, willingly. What happened to them after? The accounts are unclear. But it was believed that this willing sacrifice would satisfy the lake for many years, allowing the rest of the community to live in peace." "That's not an option," Megan said firmly. "No," Frank agreed, "but there might be an alternative. The later accounts, after European contact, speak of a different kind of offering. Not a life, but a binding." "A binding?" Megan repeated. Frank nodded. "A person who would bind themselves to the lake, become its keeper, its watcher, its guardian, neither fully alive nor fully claimed by the water, but existing in between, maintaining the boundary that prevents the lake from extending itself. Like Alice Parker, Megan said slowly. She wasn't a ghost or a vision. She was real in some sense. She was the binding. It would explain much, Frank agreed. Lily performs the ritual not to sacrifice someone else, but to bind herself partially to the lake. She lives a normal lifespan, but upon her death, the binding passes to her descendant, Alice. And now Alice is gone, Megan finished, and the lake is free to hunger again. Precisely. And it has fixated on you, Ms. Reynolds, because you found the photograph. You disturbed the equilibrium. So what do? Become the new binding? Frank hesitated. The ritual is dangerous. The binding is not death, but it's not fully life either. You would be tethered to the lake for the rest of your natural life. And after, I would become like Alice, Megan said. A guardian, keeping the lake contained. That's my understanding, yes. David shook his head vehemently. No way. There has to be another option. I'm open to suggestions, Frank said. But the new moon is tonight. The boundary between the lake and the world is at its thinnest. If Ms. Reynolds doesn't perform the binding ritual tonight, I fear the lake will simply take her, and possibly not stop with her. They all fell silent, considering the implications. Outside, the wind had risen, driving rain against the windows of the historical center. In the distance, thunder rolled across the lake. Show me the ritual, Megan said finally. Let me understand exactly what it entails before I decide. Frank nodded and began laying out the materials. The ritual instructions from Lily's diary, supplemented by his own research. The ceremony was complex but not incomprehensible. It required specific items, words to be spoken, actions to be performed at the lake's edge under the new moon. And it required a clear and conscious choice. The binding had to be entered willingly, with full understanding of what it meant. As they reviewed the ritual, the storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled around the corners of the building. Then, suddenly, a tremendous crash shook the historical center as something large struck it from outside. They rushed to the windows to see a massive wave receding from the building, a wave that had risen from the lake, traversed the hundreds of yards of land between the shore and the historical center, and crashed against the walls as if trying to break in. It knows what we're planning, Frank said, his face pale. It's trying to stop us. Or hurry me, Megan said quietly. It wants me to come to it. As if in answer, another wave rose from the distant lake, gathering height and speed as it crossed the land toward them. This one hit with even greater force, shattering one of the windows. Water poured in, soaking the floor, creeping toward the table where the ritual materials were laid out. We need to decide now, Frank urged. If we stay, we'll drown. If we try to leave, the lake will find us, Megan finished. She looked at the ritual instructions one more time, then at David, whose face was a mask of concern and fear for her. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it. I'll perform the binding. Megan, no, David protested. There has to be another way. If there is, we don't have time to find it, she replied. And I can't let the lake take more victims, not if I can stop it. Frank began gathering the ritual materials. We need to get to the shore. The binding must be performed at the edge of the water. They hurried to Frank's car, splashing through puddles that seemed to reach for their ankles as they ran. The drive to the lake shore was tense. The roads slick with rain, visibility poor through the downpour. Twice they had to detour around sections of road that had become submerged, though there had been no flooding warnings. Finally, they reached the small public access point where Megan had stopped the previous evening. The lake was violent in the storm, waves crashing against the shore, water spilling far up onto the land. But as they parked and got out, bracing themselves against the wind and rain, something strange happened. The water near the shore grew calm, forming a small, still bay just large enough for someone to walk into the lake. It's waiting for you, Frank said, his voice barely audible over the storm. They set up the ritual at the edge of this unnaturally calm water. Frank laid out the items they had brought, candles that somehow stayed lit despite the rain, herbs that gave off strange scents when crushed, a small silver knife, a bowl that they filled with lake water. As Megan prepared to begin the ritual, David grabbed her hand. "Are you sure about this? Really sure?" She looked at him, at the concern in his eyes, and felt a pang of regret for what she was about to give up. A normal life, a potential future with someone who clearly cared for her. But then she thought of the faces in the water, of Ruth and Violet and Sarah and all the others the lake had claimed over the decades. She thought of what would happen if the lake's hunger continued unchecked. "I'm sure," she said, squeezing his hand once before letting go. The ritual began with Megan standing at the water's edge, reciting words in a language she didn't understand but that Frank had carefully taught her to pronounce. As she spoke, the air around them seemed to thicken, the storm receding to a distant roar as if they stood in the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of unnatural calm. Next, she used the silver knife to make a small cut on her palm, letting her blood drip into the bowl of lake water. The water in the bowl immediately darkened, becoming almost black, and began to swirl of its own accord, though nothing was stirring it. "Now drink," Frank instructed, his voice hushed. Megan raised the bowl to her lips and drank the mixture of lake water and her own blood. It tasted of earth and algae and something older, something that had no name in any human language. As the liquid went down her throat, she felt a cold spreading through her body, as if the lake itself was entering her veins, becoming part of her. The final step was to enter the water. Megan removed her shoes and jacket, handing them to David, whose face was a mask of restrained anguish. "I'll be all right," she assured him, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. "I'll wait for you," he promised. Megan turned to the lake. The calm bay waited for her, its surface mirror smooth, despite the storm that raged around it. She took one step into the water, then another. It was cold, but not unbearably so, rising to her ankles, her knees, her waist as she waded deeper. When the water reached her chest, she began to feel it. A presence in the depths below her, ancient and vast and hungry. It was aware of her, considering her, this human who had come willingly into its domain. "I offer myself as the binding," Megan said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Not as prey, but as guardian. Not as victim, but as keeper. I will hold the boundary between water and shore, between hunger and satiation. I will be the one who watches, the one who remembers, the one who prevents." Something shifted in the water around her. The presence rose closer to the surface, circling her like a predator considering whether to strike. Then suddenly it was all around her. Not a physical entity, but a consciousness, pressing against her mind, searching for weakness, for fear it could exploit. Megan held firm, repeating the words of binding that Frank had taught her. As she spoke, she felt something change within her, a connection forming, a tether linking her to the lake and whatever dwelled within it. The lake was becoming part of her, and she part of it. Then, in her mind, she heard voices, dozens of them, overlapping, calling to her from the depths. The voices of all those the lake had taken over the centuries. Among them, she recognized Ruth, Violet, and Sarah, their once young voices now ancient and distorted by their long imprisonment in the water. "Join us," they called. "Become one with us. Surrender to the hunger." "No," Megan said firmly, both aloud and in her mind. "I am not yours to take. I am the binding, the guardian, the keeper of the shore." A surge of rage emanated from the depths, the lake or whatever entity controlled it, fighting against the constraints of the ritual. The calm bay around Megan suddenly churned, waves battering her, trying to pull her under. She struggled to keep her footing, to keep her head above water. On the shore, David started forward as if to help her, but Frank held him back. "Don't interfere," the older man warned. "The binding is taking hold. If you interrupt now, it could kill her and fail to constrain the lake." The water rose higher, reaching Megan's chin, her mouth. She tilted her head back, fighting for air as the waves tried to pull her down. In her mind, the voices grew louder, more frantic, alternating between pleading and threatening. Then abruptly, everything stopped. The water calmed, receding slightly to just below her shoulders. The voices fell silent. The presence in the depths withdrew, not gone, but accepting. The binding had taken hold. Slowly, Megan turned and began walking back toward shore. With each step, she felt the tether between herself and the lake stretching but holding firm. She was connected to it now, would always be connected to it, could feel its moods and movements as if they were her own. When she reached the shallows, David waded in to meet her, supporting her as she staggered onto dry land. Her clothes clung to her, soaked through, but she wasn't cold despite the storm. In fact, she felt strangely energized, as if some new power flowed through her veins alongside her blood. Did it work? David asked anxiously, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. Megan nodded, looking back at the lake. The unnatural calm had spread, the violent waves of the storm subsiding across the entire visible surface. It worked. I'm bound to it now. And it to me. How do you feel? Frank asked, studying her with a mix of concern and scholarly interest. Different, Megan said simply. I can feel the lake, its depths, its currents, the life within it, and the others. The others? David asked. The taken ones. They're still there, beneath the surface. But they're quieter now, less hungry. The binding has satisfied something, at least temporarily. Frank nodded as if this confirmed his research. The account suggests that the binding creates a sort of equilibrium. The lake's hunger is contained, channeled through the binder rather than unleashed on random victims. And what does that mean for Megan? David demanded. What happens to her now? I live, Megan said, answering for herself. I continue my life, my work, but I'm connected to the lake now. I'll need to be near it, to tend to it in ways I don't fully understand yet. And when I die, she paused, considering the strange new knowledge that had entered her mind during the ritual. When I die, I'll become like Alice, neither fully gone nor fully here, a guardian at the boundary until a new binder takes my place. That doesn't sound like much of a life, David said bitterly. It's better than the alternative, Megan replied. Better than letting the lake continue taking victims. Better than joining the others beneath the surface. As they walked back to Frank's car, the storm began to subside, the rain lessening to a gentle patter, the wind dying down to a whisper. Above them, clouds parted to reveal a sky full of stars but no moon. The new moon, dark and invisible, that had made the ritual possible. In the days that followed, Megan adjusted to her new reality. On the surface, her life continued much as before. She returned to her work at the museum, cataloging the Parker collection, researching the history of Lake Harmon. But beneath that normalcy, everything had changed. She could feel the lake at all times, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She knew when boats crossed its surface, when fish swam in its depths, when rain fell upon it or sunlight warmed it. And she knew when people entered its waters, could feel their movements, their life force, their vulnerability. Sometimes at night, she would walk to the shore and stand looking out over the dark water. Occasionally, she would see a figure standing on the surface in the distance, a woman in old-fashioned dress who would raise a hand in solemn greeting before fading away. Alice Parker, her predecessor in the binding, acknowledging their shared duty. The photograph that had started it all remained in the museum's collection, properly preserved and catalogued. But it had changed. The face in the water was gone, and the three girls on the dock seemed more at peace, their expressions gentler, less haunted. When visitors looked at it, they saw only a charming historical image of three young women enjoying a summer day by the lake in 1905. Only Megan could still see the truth when she looked at the photograph, could see the faint ghostly outlines of Ruth, Violet, and Sarah beneath the surface, watching but no longer hungry, no longer reaching for the living. The binding had given them a measure of peace, if not release. David found the new situation difficult to accept. He continued to search for a way to free Megan from the binding, spending hours in the historical center's archives, consulting with experts in folklore and the occult. Megan let him search, though she knew he would find no solution. The binding was permanent, at least for her lifetime. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked one evening as they walked along the lakeshore path. "Being tied to this place, to whatever is in there?" Megan considered the question seriously. "It did at first," she admitted. "But now I understand better what I'm doing, what purpose I serve. The lake has always been here, has always had its hunger. Before the binding ritual was discovered, it took freely, whenever and whoever it wanted. The binding doesn't eliminate that hunger, but it channels it, controls it. I'm not just a victim or a sacrifice. I'm a protector." David looked out over the calm surface of Lake Harmon, trying to reconcile the peaceful scene before him with the horror he had witnessed the night of the storm. "And when you're gone, then someone else will need to take up the binding," Megan said simply. "That's how it's always been. A chain of guardians stretching back to before written history. And if no one does?" Megan didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on something David couldn't see. Ripples in the water where no wind blew, perhaps, or movements in the depths that shouldn't be possible. Finally, she said, "Then the hunger would return, stronger than before. The lake would feed again." They continued their walk in silence, following the path as it curved along the shore. As they passed a small, secluded cove, Megan paused, her head tilting as if listening to something. "What is it?" David asked. "Just the lake," she said, a small, enigmatic smile crossing her face. "It's peaceful tonight." And it was, the water still as glass, reflecting the star-filled sky above. To an ordinary observer, it would have appeared simply beautiful, a perfect North Wood scene, tranquil and timeless. But Megan knew better now. She could feel the ancient presence beneath the surface, temporarily satiated but always watching, always waiting. And she could sense the others, the taken ones, drifting in the depths, Ruth and Violet and Sarah among them, their hunger contained by her binding but never fully gone. As long as she lived, as long as the binding held, the lake would remain peaceful, its hunger channeled and controlled. People would swim in its waters, boat on its surface, picnic on its shores, never knowing what dwelled in its depths or what price was paid for their safety. Megan Reynolds, archivist and keeper of history, had become something more, the guardian of Lake Harmon, the binding between the hungry water and the unsuspecting world. And in time, when her mortal life ended, she would join Alice Parker and all the binders who had come before, watching over the lake from that strange boundary between life and death, between land and water, until a new keeper took her place. For now, though, she turned away from the cove and continued walking with David, back toward the lights of Lakewood, leaving the lake dark and still behind them. Peaceful for the moment, contained but never truly tamed.